passage this morning comes from John 6, and very short verses, only verses 16 to 21, where Jesus walks on water. Obviously, it's a famous verse, famous passage. Now, before we get into the details of that, let me ask this question for all of us. What are you afraid in your life? What is it that you are afraid in your life? And depending on where you are, your stage of life, that may be different from one to another, and your fear might have changed as well over the years. When you're very little, very young, perhaps you're afraid of the dark. You're afraid of the dark. You're afraid of sleeping on your own. My youngest daughter still sleep in my bedroom, for example. But as you start going to school, start getting a bit older, you perhaps are, afraid of the playground. There are a lot of other children. Perhaps you're scared or afraid of your teacher, even. But then, as you grow up even more and become a teen, what are you afraid of as a teen? Perhaps you're afraid of missing out in life. There's this terms, hashtag FOMO, right? Fear of missing out. Perhaps you're fear of missing out. You always check your phone as a teen, what people are doing, what people are saying. But then you grow a bit older, you go to uni, your fear perhaps changes as well again. Now you fear of not doing well in your study, and you fear of not getting a job after you graduate. Or perhaps you're in the middle of studying your uni degree and you afraid of perhaps you've been doing the wrong degree. Is this the right degree? Is this the right choice to make? And then you graduate, and then you fear whether, you're still single no matter. You fear of never ever finding your soulmate and get married. But then you get married, and if you get married, then perhaps you fear of, 1 year went by, 2 years, 3 years. You're afraid, fearful that you may not have children. And if you have children, perhaps your fear is that you're afraid of how your children are going to turn out to be. You fear that your children will not grow up to be anyone, they become nobody. Maybe that's your fear. And perhaps you're afraid of, not having enough money or enough fun for retirement. As you grow older, get older, you say I don't have enough saving yet to retire. Maybe that's your fear that you won't be successful in your life. And some of us perhaps still fearful of death, that you're afraid of death. Now, so we've been studying the Gospel of John. We get to this passage where John talks about Jesus walking on water. This is obviously the first, the fifth sign. There are 7 signs in the Gospel of John. This is the 5th sign. Immediately come after the 4th sign that we looked at last week, where Jesus feed the 5,000, right? The 5,000 men. So this is the 5th sign. And what is this sign about? And well, based on my question, you may have guessed. Well, this passage, this sign that Jesus walks on water talks about fear. So that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about what does fear do to us. And then we're going to talk about why are we afraid. And finally, how to not be afraid. So pretty straightforward. What does fear do? Why are we afraid? And how not to be afraid. So that's what we're going to look at this morning. So first thing, what does fear do? What does fear do? Well, you see, knowing your fear will help us discover what is important in your life. So, for example, when you fear about how your children going to grow up to be, they are what's important in your life. You see, you're fearful of them, their life is because that's what's important for you in your life. Now, if you're afraid of that you might not have enough money for retirement, then that is what's important in your life. And if you're uni students and you're still studying and you're afraid of they're not doing well in your study or not getting a job, and that is what's important in your life. To be successful, to be seen by others that you're doing well. So that's important, right? So, and you will see that oftentimes our life is driven by this fear. Because your fear of not being successful, not getting a job, then our life be driven by it so much, just to compensate on that fear. And that's normal, you see. Whatever it is that you fear, it will drive you. It will drive your life. For example, if you're afraid of being lonely in life, some people are, and then you will move from one relationship to another to compensate that, because you're afraid of being lonely, being alone, to not have someone in your life. You will jump from one relationship to another. You will seek comfort and fulfillment in your life from that relationship. Now you will end up using people for your own sake. You will use people, you will manipulate people in those relationships. Another example, if say you're afraid of being fat, right? F-A-T, fat. If you're afraid of being fat or ugly or, then you'll be driven to be beautiful at all costs. Perhaps you may become a gym freak. You show up in gym every day, and, exercise is a good thing, but not when it becomes your fear. Not when you're driven by fear or fear of being fat or being ugly. Now, because if that's the case, then you will constantly be looking in front of the mirror, checking out yourself, and tell yourself, and obviously judge yourself that you're not good enough. You don't look good enough. There's flabby arms, flat big tummy, and whatever it is, right? And you'll be looking at the mirror and you'll be judging yourself, be so critical of yourself. Do you know that oftentimes the harshest judge in your life is not others, but yourself? Oftentimes we are the harshest judge of our own life. And if you're afraid of being fat or ugly, then you will constantly be judging yourself, looking at a mirror and judge yourself. Now, how about if you're afraid of being insignificant, or you're afraid of being unsuccessful, being nobody in life? What would you do? Well, you'll be driven in your career. You will work so hard. You will perhaps even become a workaholic. You will destroy your family. You will destroy your marriage. You tell your wife, or you tell your husband, or you tell your children, I did all this for you, when they don't need you to work that hard. They need you to be home. But because your fear is that you won't be nobody, you become nobody, or you become unsuccessful or insignificant, you'll be driven by your career. And if that is your fear, then you will soon realize that no amount of money or success will ever be enough. You will be driven from one success to another, because the old success is no longer good enough for you. Is that you this morning? Now, a very wealthy man was once asked, a very wealthy man, how much money is enough? And he responded, well, just a little bit more. Just a little bit more. You see, if success is what you're after, if your fear is being insignificant, unsuccessful, then you'll be chasing one success after another, because it's never gonna be enough. How about if you're some of us are afraid of being stupid, look stupid, ignorant. So what do? You'll seek knowledge. You'll seek knowledge, you pursue knowledge. Again, all this not in itself are not bad. But if we are driven by fear, then it's no good. You'll study hard. If you're afraid of, people judging you, being stupid and ignorant, then you want to look intelligent. You perhaps pursue study a lot, you study all the time. Now, if that drives you, you will always feel inadequate. You will always feel stupid. Because there's always more things to learn. There's always more things to know. And those kind of people will always feel inadequate. Oftentimes when they speak, when they share, they feel like they're a fraud, you see, because they do not know enough. They just don't know enough. They feel like a fraud. See, whatever it is that you fear, not only that it will drive your life, it will also enslave you. Whatever that you fear, not only it will drive your life, but it will enslave you. It will suck all the life and soul out of you. Well, money will become your master. You'll be enslaved by it. And beauty will always be judging how you look and will judge your imperfection, however little that is. And if intelligence is what you look up to, then you will feel that you will become proud of yourself. And when you look at people who know less than you, you will look down on them. You will despise them because they are not as smart as you are. Second point, why then are we afraid? Okay, so we have look at first point, what does it do to us? It's no good, right? Fear does no good to us. But why are we afraid? Let me say this, we are afraid because we are in the dark. Okay, I'm going to explain this. Why did I say that? Why we are afraid because we are in the dark? Well, because the Gospel of John have shown us that. If you pay careful attention when we read the passage, he's shown us to us that. And also in the beginning of the Gospel of John in chapter 1. Okay, now, but here it is again. Let me read it for us. John 6, verse 16 to 19. Okay, verse 16 to 19. When the evening came, his disciples went down to the sea, got into a boat, and started across the sea to Capernaum. It was now dark, and Jesus had not yet come to them. The sea became rough because a strong wind was blowing. When they had rowed about 3 or 4 miles, they saw Jesus walking on the sea and coming near the boat, and they were frightened. You see, the disciples were frightened. Well, why were the disciples afraid? Why did they frighten themselves? Like, why they afraid, right? So that's a question. Well, it's not the storm. Some of us may have guessed it was the storm. Well, there's another story where the disciples were afraid because of the storm. But that was a different story. In that story, Jesus was on the boat. Jesus was sleeping. And they were afraid that they might die because of the storm. But that's not this story. This story is not about the storm. They're not afraid of the storm. And there's 2 other gospel writers, 2 gospel witness accounts of this particular incident, Matthew and Mark. So we're going to turn to Matthew and Mark a little bit and to look at how they see this story, right? How they witness this story, this event. So Matthew's account is on Matthew chapter 14, verse 25, 26. I'm going to read it for us. It's slightly clearer in Matthew, or not so in Mark. But let me read from Matthew 14, 25, 26. And in the 4th watch of the night, he came to them. Jesus came to the disciples, walking on the sea. But when the disciples saw Jesus walking on the sea, they were terrified and said, "It is a ghost." And they cried out in fear. Did you see that? It was the 4th watch of the night. That's between 3 a.m. to 6 a.m. It was dark. Between 3 a.m. and 6 a.m. And the disciples were frightened when they saw, not Jesus, when they saw something or someone walking on water. Okay? They were afraid because they thought, in Matthew's account it's clear, they thought it was a ghost. That's why they are afraid. They did not afraid of the storm. They were rowing. They try hard to fight the storm, to row to the shore. They were afraid because something is walking on water in the dark. They thought it was a ghost. See, not only children, young children are afraid of the dark. We adults too are afraid in the dark. Of course, I'm talking about spiritual darkness, not real darkness. But the disciples were afraid in the dark because they could not see who it was that was walking on water. They thought it was a ghost and they were afraid. And if we are in the spiritual darkness, we too will be living in fear. And we'll be driven, our life will be driven from one fear to another. Whatever that fear is, we'll be driven by it. That's our life purpose, will be the entire life, our entire life will be driven by that fear. Now, what are you afraid of today? What is it that you fear today? Is it to be unrecognized, to be insignificant? You're afraid for your children to grow up to be nobody? Are you afraid of death? What is it that you're afraid of? Is it ignorant? Is it being lonely? See, in order for us to see this more clearly, what is it that we are fear of? We can ask this question. What am I striving for in this life? What are you working so hard for in your life? What is that? What is the thing that you pursue most in your life? That will help us to reveal what is it that drives us. What is it that we are afraid of? So what are you striving for today? What is the driving force of your life? What is your purpose? What is it that you pursue? The one thing that if you say to yourself, if I don't have that thing, I will be miserable. But if I have that one thing that you're pursuing right now, that if I have that, I'll be happy, my life will be complete. What is that? See, we're afraid like the disciples because we can't see clearly. We're in darkness. Some of us are afraid and being pursued by this, being driven by this fear because we can't see clearly. We're in the dark. Just like the disciples. Maybe you are still in the dark and you're not realizing it. Maybe it's because you believe Satan's lies in your life. I like how Tim Keller says it, like Satan doesn't control us with fang marks on the flesh. It's not obvious, you see. It's not that kind of things that Satan do, but he says this. But Satan does this, control us with lies in the heart. So Satan doesn't lie, doesn't control us with fangs marks on the flesh, but with lies in the heart. Perhaps you believe in Satan's lie that if you only have that thing, if you only have that person, if you have that beauty, if you have that body, if you have that kind of money, if you have that kind of success, then you'll be complete, then you'll be happy. That is Satan's lies in our heart. See, the only way to not be driven by fear is to be in the light so that we can see clearly. Jesus says I'm going to jump ahead in John chapter 8, okay? John chapter 8 verse 12 says this. Jesus says, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have light of life. Do you see that? Whoever follows me, Jesus said, will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. Oftentimes, we are fearful and our lives are driven by it because we do not follow Jesus. We are not disciples of Christ. Of course, when we talk about following Jesus, in the Gospel of John especially, it's about being disciple of Christ, following, obeying. Because John make a distinction between those crowd, right, who follow Jesus versus those who are being disciple of Jesus. And when Jesus say, those who follow me are not those crowd who follow Jesus, who just want to see the big miracles that Jesus performed, but those who stick around, who remain with Jesus, who obey and being a disciple of Jesus. And those will not walk in darkness, Jesus said. So this leads us to my final point. It's going to be a quick one today. My final point is this: how then not to be afraid? How not to be afraid? See, when Jesus saw that the disciples were afraid, what did he do? He revealed himself to them. He revealed himself to them, and let me read for us from verse 20 to 21. John 6, verse 20. Jesus said to them, "It is I. Do not be afraid." Then they were glad to take him into the boat, and immediately the boat was at the land to which they were going. So they've been striving hard, you see. They've been rowing for hours. They cannot reach the land because of the storm. And immediately, when they saw Jesus and Jesus revealed himself to them, they reached the land to which they were going. What does this signify? It signifies this: that, we've been jumping, striving for one success after another, whatever that you fear of, whatever that you pursue in your life. There'll never be enough until you have Jesus in your life. Then they reach the land to which they were going. There's no longer striving there. There's no longer pursuing one success after another, trying so hard. When Jesus arrives, they're no longer afraid, and they reach the land. See, the words that we have here, when Jesus revealed to them, "It is I," the famous name of God. You see, it's the Greek word is actually ego eimi, which means I am. I am. Ego eimi. So next week we're going to look at Jesus' statement of "I am the bread of life." Ego eimi. There's 7 of them, the famous one. But here, even this, Jesus said ego eimi. I am. It's not like it is I, but I am. Yeah, remember that is God's name. I am is God's name. Remember the story about Moses. So God sent Moses to lead the people of God, the Israelites, out of slavery from Egypt. And then God revealed himself to Moses in this way. I'm going to read for us from Exodus 3, verse 13 to 15. Then Moses said to God, "If I come to the people of Israel and say to them, 'The God of your fathers has sent me to you,' and they ask me, 'What is his name?' what shall I say to them?" God said to Moses, "I am who I am." And he said, "Say this to the people of Israel, 'I am,'" capital I am, "has sent me to you." God also said to Moses, "Say this to the people of Israel, 'The Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, has sent me to you. This is my name forever, and thus I am to be remembered throughout all generations." I am is significant in the life of God's people. So when Jesus revealed himself to the disciples who were frightened, he came to them by revealing himself by saying, "I am. Do not be afraid." So what does "I am" mean? Capital I, capital A, capital M. What does that mean? Well, it means simply that God's always in the present tense. He has no beginning and he has no ending. There was no such thing as was or will be for God. God is. He's always in the present tense. He's not like any other gods. He's not like any other gods. He is the only God, the only all-sufficient, all-powerful God. He's the Alpha and the Omega. He's the beginning. He's the A and he's the Z. He's the beginning and he's the end. I am. The disciples were afraid. And this is what Jesus said to them. "Look at me. Fix your eyes on me. Look at I am." Are you looking at I am this morning? when you work, when you study, when you raise your family, whatever that you do, whatever stage of life that you are in at the moment, do you fix your eyes on Jesus and look at I am? And this is this sign, Jesus walks on water, comes immediately after the feeding of the 5,000. So if you read Mark, if you read Matthew, and now John, all three of them have these accounts of Jesus walking on water immediately after the sign, the fourth sign, which is Jesus feeding the 5,000, breaking the bread, the 5 loaves of bread that has 12 baskets left over. Amazing, amazing, awesome sign that Jesus showed his power. So this Jesus walk on water comes immediately after that. Not only here, but in Matthew and Mark as well. Now there's a significance in there because it's important for Jesus want to tell them, the disciples, to reveal to them who he is, who Jesus is. Jesus is God. He's the Son of God. Jesus is I am. But the disciples missed that, you see. Even after the feeding of 5,000, and we say that's 5,000 men, so they're likely to be feeding of 10,000 or 15,000 of people with 5 loaves of bread. The disciples missed the significance of who Jesus is from that sign, from that miracle. And now they jump onto a boat. There was a storm, they were rowing, and they saw a figure, and they were afraid because they missed who Jesus is. Now, Mark tells us his side of the story of this same account, his witness of this same account. He experienced this as well, just like John experienced it, yeah, perhaps. And Mark tells us his side of the story. And Mark chapter 6, verse 49. I'm going to read it for us, how Mark sees this account. But when they saw him walking, Jesus, on the sea, and they thought it was a ghost, again, the same way as Matthew interpret this, that they saw a ghost, and cried out, for they all saw him and were terrified. But immediately he spoke to them and said, "Take heart, it is I." Again there, ego eimi. "Do not be afraid." And he got into the boat with them, and the wind ceased. And they were utterly astounded, for they did not understand about the loaves. Why they were astounded? Because they did not understand about the loaves, but their hearts were hardened. So that's how Mark sees it. It's like they were astounded because they did not understand about the loaves, about the miracles, about the sign of the feeding of 5,000. They missed the significance of who Jesus is. Finally, now they understand. Their hearts were hardened. They did not understand what Jesus is trying to reveal to them. So do you know why you're afraid today? Are you obsessed perhaps with perfection in your life? Are you a perfectionist? Are you driven for wealth, to be wealthy? Are you driven to be beautiful, to look amazing? Or what you sought after in life is a comfortable, pain-free, relaxed, enjoyable life? What are you afraid of in life? And whatever it is it because that you don't know who Jesus is, just like the disciples? They miss the significance of who Jesus is. And they were afraid. Their hearts were hardened. Or perhaps like them, your hearts were hardened. You've heard the story, you heard the testimony of who Jesus is, yet your hearts were hardened. You're saying, I know I'm supposed to live sacrificially, but God, I just a little bit more, Lord. I just want a little bit more money, a little bit more saving, a little bit more success. Is it because you do not understand the significance of Jesus feeding the 5,000 with 12 baskets left over. What is that? What is Jesus saying? He's saying, I am enough. I'm all sufficient. I'm your provider. Do you believe that? Do you believe that I am enough for you? See, when we are so driven by success in life, working so hard, ignoring our family, then we're saying to Jesus, regardless of what your mouth confess and say, but truly in our heart we say, Jesus, you are not enough. I need to do my bit so that I can be enough. Jesus is not enough. Our hearts were hardened. We did not understand the sign about the 5 loaves with 12 baskets left over. The abundance of life in Jesus. That whatever our life is, that God has apportioned to us, Jesus said it is enough. It is more than enough. Or is it because we don't believe in the testimony at all? We just say, I'm not quite sure. I don't believe in that. Now, there's no reason why we should be living in fear anymore. There's no reason why we should be living in fear and letting that fear drive our lives. There's no reason, if you are in Christ, if you believe in Jesus, if you truly is a disciple of Christ Jesus, then there's no reason that you should be living in fear and letting it drive your life and your life purpose. So whatever it is that you fear, loneliness, Jesus was left alone on the cross. He cried out like Jesus never prayed to God the Father like he prayed on the cross. Jesus on the cross was left alone. He cried out, my God, my God. You see, Jesus and the Father are one. When Jesus prayed, he always said, my Father. They're so close from eternity to eternity. They're that close. Yet he was left alone on the cross. He was lonely on the cross. He cried, my God, why did you leave me alone? Why did you forsake me? He did that so that you don't have to be lonely ever again in your life. If you put your faith and your trust in him, you'll never have to be lonely, because he was left alone on the cross for your sake. Now, if insignificant is your fear, not loneliness, perhaps insignificant, that you will amount to nobody, you know what happened? Jesus is the Son of God. Before he came down to heaven, from heaven, the heavens, the angels worshiping and sing praises to Jesus. He was amazing. That was amazing view. He was significant. He's the Son of God, and he's God. Yet he came down to be nobody, to be servant, to die for you. He became insignificant. He didn't come down. Jesus didn't come down to be king on a noble family, from a noble family. But he came in a family who's insignificant, are poor. Why? So that through his poverty, through his insignificance, you can be rich in spirit. You can be significant, so that you'll never be left alone, felt insignificant and poor. Because Jesus came down from heaven to be nobody, so that you can be somebody, so that you can be the son and the daughter of the Most High God, the King of Kings. How about death? Some of us may be fear of death. On that cross, Jesus was crucified. He died, but not for long. He died for 3 days. He conquered death. He took upon himself death, so that you and I can taste eternal life, can know the assurance of resurrection. So there's nothing to fear about death. Whatever it is that you fear today, my brothers and my sisters, remember this, that all of them, all those fears, all of them melt in the presence of I am. John 6 verse 17 says this. This is important. I want you to highlight this on your Bible. If you have not highlighted this, I want you to highlight this. It was now dark, and Jesus had not yet come to them. That is amazing. Out of all this, apart from Jesus revealing to the disciples, says, I am, this is perhaps one of the most significant verse in that passage. It was now dark and Jesus had not yet come to them. When Jesus is not in your life, it will be darkness. Wherever Jesus is not there, there is darkness. It was now dark because Jesus had not yet come to them. Perhaps you're living in fear, whatever that fear is, right? That fear may present itself as a good thing, you see, like motivation to work hard, to accumulate wealth, to be successful, to get a good career. It may present itself in such a beautiful package that we forget that perhaps that's Satan's lie. They're going to drive us to that rather than to God, the giver of good things in our lives. Jesus is saying to you today, you who are watching right now or listening to this later on, Jesus is saying to you, look at I am and believe. See, apart from Jesus, there's only darkness. The disciples did not remain, however, in the dark. They were afraid because they were in the dark. They did not understand the significance of who Jesus is and who Jesus revealed himself to be when Jesus fed the 5,000. But they did not remain there. They did not remain in the dark. When Matthew tells his side of the story, this is how he ends the account. Okay? Matthew 14, verse 32 to 33. This is how Matthew ends this passage, this story. And when they got into the boat, the wind ceased. So in Matthew's account, remember Peter actually asked Jesus, if that's you, Jesus, let me come to you. And Jesus let Peter come to Jesus. So here it says when they got into the boat, when Jesus and Peter got onto the boat, the wind ceased immediately. And those in the boat, what did they do? They worship him. They worship Jesus, saying, truly, you are the Son of God. They did not remain in the dark. Now finally, they get it. They missed the feeding of the 5,000, the significance of that. Now they finally got it. They worship Jesus. When you are in the light, when you know that Jesus is I am, you cannot help but bow down and worship him. See, now their fear is different. They no longer fear ghosts. They no longer fear insignificance or being ugly, being lonely, or whatever it is. Their fear has changed. Now they have another fear. They worship Jesus in fear and trembling. What is that? Well, there's only one fear that will never enslave you, that will not enslave you and drive you to death. And that fear is the fear of God. Only the fear of God, the only fear that will give you freedom in life and that will give you life, not death. Only when your whole life is a worship of Jesus, when you pursue and fix your eyes on Jesus, only then you will not be afraid. You will not be driven by fear in your life. So this is my prayer. This is what I want to encourage all of us. Believe in the testimony. Believe in the signs that Jesus revealed himself to us. This is now our 5th sign. Do you believe? Step out of darkness today and step into light. Believe in the light. Believe in the light. And now let's pray.